we're coming on the air tonight, most of you watching right now are probably feeling some kind of effect of that huge winter storm that's been pounding the country for days now, with hundreds of thousands of people losing power because of the snow, the wind, plus dangerous flooding, even tornadoes, and it's not over yet. We're going to tell you what's ahead. Plus, we know people with health insurance can get reimbursed for tests, and the CDC says higher quality masks are best, but that doesn't mean everyone has access to tests or masks. The White House has plans to change that, but with a new poll showing a lot of Americans are not happy with the response, is it too little too late? Plus, have you heard this? Beijing now says they're not going to sell tickets to the public for the Winter Games. Just a couple weeks away. This is China's latest move to try to keep COVID in check. And the game's on. We're live with that. And if you ordered a package and are still waiting for it, this could be why. Thieves have been busting into train cars in L.A., and now a train full of deliveries totally derailed. Was it because of all the package trash those thieves left behind? Plus, it's being called white gold, and the future of America's car industry could depend on it. In tonight's original, how lithium in California could cut our dependence from other sources and just maybe help bring a region out of poverty. We got a lot to get to tonight. Hey, I'm Hallie. And right now, as we speak, some 10 million of us are still under some kind of winter weather alert as this big storm is moving across the east tonight. It's been slamming the rest of the country for a few days now, leaving 2 people dead, covering roads and power lines in ice and snow. And more than 24 homes have been destroyed by tornadoes in Florida. At one point, you had 100 million people under winter weather and coastal flooding alerts. In North Carolina, 2 people were killed in a car accident, with the Highway Patrol saying they responded to more than 600 crashes in that state over the last couple days. The storm's heading north today, putting 21 million people under coastal flooding advisories, including what you're looking at, Massachusetts, with the wind whipping up waves along the coast. Of course, the snow was a big deal in a lot of places, including Pennsylvania, where they got 14 inches of snow in Erie. It piled up so fast, it totally buried that guy's car. Good luck, man. Bill Cairns is joining us now with the forecast. Bill, to call it a rough weekend for basically the eastern half of the U.S. would be kind of an understatement, right? You saw records for snow. You had tornadoes on the Gulf Coast. We don't normally hear those two things go hand in hand in the winter, you know?
No. Yeah, it was a kitchen sink weekend. I mean, we started this storm Thursday night as it entered from Canada into Montana. I mean, you're looking at the damage from those tornadoes that went through the Naples area and the Fort Myers area. Those are serious tornadoes. Those weren't like just weak ones. I mean, they were like EF2s. I mean, we had winds that were like 130 miles per hour with those things. So we're lucky no one got killed or even injured, and we just had damage to clean up from. It could have been a lot worse. And the snow totals are rolling in. I'd say we're maybe like 95% done with our snow. And the highest total I've seen comes out of Ohio, of all places. Ashtabula there in northeast Ohio, 25 inches of snow. Buffalo not far behind with almost 18 inches. And how about Iowa? I mean, the kids don't usually see snowstorms like this in Iowa. Des Moines, 14 inches of snow. And the mountains of North Carolina got it pretty good. In Cleveland, Ohio, you expect snow there, 12 inches for you. And as far as the winds went, I mean, we saw these winds just kicking up the surf all along the East Coast over the last 2 days. It gusted over 70 miles per hour in North Carolina. And it wasn't just the East Coast. When this storm dove through the plains, even Oklahoma saw gusts up to 70 miles per hour. Fire Island, just south of Long Island, New York, 69 this morning, and even Massachusetts this afternoon was up into the 60s. So where's our storm now? It's heading through Vermont and about to head into Quebec. But the blue on the map is what snow is left over. A good deal of light snow on the backside of this storm. I think the worst road to be traveling on right now is probably the New York State Thruway, or heading down southwards, 81 from Syracuse southwards down into Pennsylvania. Got some snow-covered roads. But again, things are improving, but now the temperatures are going to drop. I mean, it's been above freezing in a lot of areas today. Get out there now and get rid of that slush, because tonight it's going to be in the 20s. Tomorrow that slush will be ice chunks that you'll have trouble moving. You don't want to deal with that.
Oh, Bill.
Again, Hallie mentioned it, 10 million people are under winter storm warnings. So, Hallie, not a lot of snow left with this one.
You know the way to get to my heart, ice chunks,
1 to 2 inches.
I mean, can we talk more about ice chunks, please? Please, I'm over it. You know, what is coming down the pike, right? Because the thing is, I'm here in D.C. We got more snow apparently coming later in the week and coming next weekend, too. Yeah, it's winter, right? But this winter feels colder than last winter. I don't know, anecdotally to me. Like,
do you really want to know, or don't you just want to be surprised? Sometimes I don't like knowing the future, and I know it's going to be a little rough. So here we go. We're calling this winter's vengeance. This is like winter's like oh, you enjoyed that warm December, huh? Because here I come, and I'm here to stay. So this next Arctic blast is going to come down. It's going to start in the northern plains tomorrow. Wednesday it moves to the Ohio Valley. There's not a lot of snow or ice. This is just a real blast of Arctic air. We'll call it frigid, Arctic, North Pole, whatever you want to, whatever adjective you want to call it. It's going to be dangerously cold again with really biting wind chills all the way down into even Arkansas. And then the core of this cold air will eventually make it to the East Coast. Guess what? Another cold weekend coming your way. D.C. at 27 on Friday. That's it. That's your high temperature, Hallie. 27 degrees. And it's going to stay cold all through next week. We are stuck in an Arctic air mass. And Hallie, there is a chance for some snow on Saturday. We'll get more into that as the week progresses.
Come back, Bill Cairns, knower of the future, burdened with the knowledge of what is to come.
It is. It's painful.
World's smallest violin. Thank you, Bill. I appreciate you being with us and bringing us the forecast. Thank you. So today, for the first time, we're finally hearing about what it was like in those terrifying moments inside Congregation BETH Israel in Texas when a man took 4 people hostage after interrupting a Saturday service. They were held for something like 10, 11 hours. The person who took them hostage becoming, quote, increasingly belligerent and threatening towards the end. So here's what went down. When this stranger showed up at the synagogue that morning, Rabbi Charlie CYTRON-WALKER says he welcomed him, even gave him a cup of tea. But when the rabbi turned his back, he says he heard the click of the gun. He described how he used his security training to try to get away. Watch.
We were terrified. And when I saw an opportunity where he wasn't in a good position, I made sure that the 2 gentlemen who were still with me, that they were ready to go. The exit wasn't too far away. I told them to go. I threw a chair at the gunman, and I headed for the door.
It's incredible to listen to. It gives you chills. The investigation is now taking a new twist, stretching to England, where police in the UK arrested 2 teenagers. They're the suspect's 2 sons, according to a senior law enforcement official. You're about to see some video of where this suspect was living before everything happened. UK officials are working with the FBI and calling this a, quote, terror-related incident. I want to bring in Sam Brock, who's in Colleyville, Texas, tracking all of these developments here. Sam, there's a lot to get to, and let me start with what we just talked about here. The idea that the suspect was maybe in touch with his sons at some point during what was happening on Saturday. Do we know that for sure? Do we know what that contact or those conversations was about?
I can tell you, Hallie, that there were definitely conversations going on, according to folks who were watching on the Zoom as this was all unfolding, that family members of Akram's were trying to reach him. We know that his brother as well acknowledged he was in the Situation Room trying to talk to his brother and convince him to allow the hostages to leave. So that's all out there. In terms of the sons being detained and why that might be, the FBI has already said that there was no one else involved in this situation. The UK also, Hallie, it's notable, has looser rules when it comes to arrests, especially if it is related to terrorism. So it is entirely possible that the sons in this case did nothing wrong, but investigators wanted to find out what might be Akram's state of mind. Did he harbor any hate? What caused him to leave the UK and come to the U.S. at the very end of December? All those are open-ended questions right now. But as far as the family statements as well, they say there is nothing else that we could have done to force him to surrender. They tried. They also apologized to those families here in the North Dallas area, Tarrant County, that were affected by this, the horror, the trauma that they had to endure. And in a New York Times interview as well that was just published today, the brother also goes on to say that the mental health issues involved here were going on for years. He cannot figure out, Hallie, why Akram was allowed to travel to the United States in the first place. How did he get a visa? How did he acquire a weapon? These are questions right now that the FBI no doubt is investigating. I am so struck. So, Sam, we also heard today from the rabbi, of course, who was at the center of this hostage situation, describing in extremely dramatic terms, right, how they were able to get away, how they were able to escape from this person. And I am so struck that this is somebody who had security training, right? And if that doesn't say a lot about the state of anti-Semitic threats in this country, I don't know what does. It is a terrifying commentary on where we are. But yes, the skin on the back of my neck was standing up. So the hairs on the back of my neck were standing up a second ago as we heard the rabbi relaying all of this, just how close of a call it was. And on August 22nd, right here, the Secure Community Network, which advises temples and mosques and churches all around the country to prepare for an active shooter event, suddenly found it playing out in real time right here in Texas. And it is possible that the actions of this rabbi throwing a chair, as you played at the top of your show, at the individual, at the gunman, when he took a pause as it was getting more tense, might have been the reason that those 4 lives were saved.
It's incredible. Sam, Brock, keeping an eye on all those developments in Colleyville, Texas. Sam, thank you. So today, you've got civil rights groups in the administration using this day, this holiday, MLK Day, as you know, Martin Luther King Jr. Day, to try to push for voting rights legislation. We heard from Dr. King's family and some different voting rights groups who were marching across the Frederick Douglass Memorial Bridge here in Washington as the president really pushed again to try to get something done to protect election reforms in this country. Watch.
It's no longer just about who gets to vote. It's about who gets to count the vote and whether your vote counts at all. It's about 2 insidious things: voter suppression and election subversion.
You also heard from Vice President Harris today, speaking remotely to folks at Ebenezer Baptist Church in Atlanta, saying we've got to honor Dr. King's legacy. That's something black leaders and activists have really been stressing.
Don't quote King if you're not willing to do the work of King by protecting all citizens of this country.
The Senate plans to start debate tomorrow. No votes set for now, but there's still that whole they need 60 votes thing to get anything done on voting rights. Right now, they don't have it, and they don't have enough votes to get the rules changed to be able to get there. I want to bring in Garrett Hake now. And Garrett, listen, this is obviously an incredibly important day to people for whom voting rights is the top priority. And yet, the reality on the Senate side is that it is almost certain to not happen, right? Because unless Senator Joe Manchin and Senator Kyrsten Sinema, 2 Democrats who are opposed to this, or any one of the 50 Republican senators who also oppose this change their minds, there's not a path forward.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, Democratic leaders were hoping today would be the day. They've been building pressure, building momentum, trying to get to this moment, hoping they could, if not get the 10 Republicans they needed to pass these bills outright, which seemed highly unlikely, then perhaps they could change the minds of at least those 2 Democratic holdouts on changing the rules. But here we are in the deadline, and Kyrsten Sinema and Joe Manchin remain as committed as ever to preserving the Senate rules as they are, which means yet another deadline will slip with no action on this voting rights package. Hallie? I
was struck by something that Congressman Jim Clyburn said today. I think it was over on MSNBC, basically pointing out, hey, we're not asking these 2 senators or any of the 50 Republicans, but for the sake of this conversation, let's keep it to the Democrats. He's saying we're not saying eliminate this, filibuster, this Senate rules change for everything. We're saying do it just like a little carve out just for this issue. And it's worth pointing out, it's happened something like 150 plus times before, some caveats to some of those exceptions, things like the debt limit, et cetera. Is that strategy, do you think, going to be at all effective here? I know you're not a mind reader, but talk to me about that piece of things.
I don't have to be, because the senators involved have said it won't be effective. Right. Kyrsten Sinema has said she won't support any carve-out like this, and Joe Manchin has said similar things. Manchin used a pretty good metaphor for it. He says, look, when you start carving up a turkey, you end up eating all of it. And that's the fear, at least in part, of these Democratic senators, that once they start making changes to the filibuster, it becomes very hard to stop, either for this Congress or a future Republican-controlled one. They're not interested in the carve-out idea.
So then what are you watching for this week, Garrett? Basically the formal end to this voting rights push, or is there some other twist that could be coming down the lane?
I'm waiting to see if Chuck Schumer really makes his Democratic caucus walk the plank on this. We know this won't pass. We know the voting on the rules changes will divide Democrats. Voting on the bills themselves keeps them all united. Will they take a divisive vote on a rule change that won't pass? I'm waiting to see.
Garrett, wait, Garrett. I'm getting some more breaking news coming into us as we speak from my phone and Instagram, because you have some exciting news to be able to share that you and your wife have shared, which is baby girl Hake coming down the lane.
That's right. Allison and I are very excited to welcome our baby girl in July. Name embargoed until delivery, but we just couldn't be more thrilled.
How did you know I was going to ask you to name the name? Just tell me real quick. Just short list. Go ahead.
It's off the record, Hallie. I'm sorry.
We'll come back to you on that one. Garrett Hake, we are so thrilled for you, the NBC News family getting a little bit bigger. We love you, pal. We're so excited for you and Allison. Thanks Garrett.
Al.
Elsewhere on the show, from baby news to White House news, the natural transition, this new poll out there shows just a third of Americans approve of the administration's handling of the pandemic. This is some new numbers that the Biden administration has got to be looking at. And it's coming at a time when you've got so many people in this country trying to figure out, how do I get testing? How do I afford testing? How do I get better masks, right? Which the CDC is now recommending that you use, those N95s or those KN95s, to give you the best protection against the Omicron surge. Mike Memoli is covering this for us tonight from outside the White House. So, Mike, let's talk about that poll that we just mentioned. I am sure the White House has its own polling, but CBS YouGov says that just a third of people, 33% of people roughly, approve of how the White House has handled the pandemic. Nearly 70%, the number we're showing on our screen, think that the information coming in is confusing. This is where the frustration seems to be coming from. Are people that you're talking to inside the Biden administration looking at those numbers and thinking, oh boy, we got to try to correct course here?
Absolutely, Hallie, because let's think about it. Thursday, big day for the president, marking 1 year in office. That means a year ago right now, I was wrapping up a long stay in Delaware where we were covering the transition, where just about every conversation I had with the Biden transition team, the incoming White House staff, was where they recognized that the president's handling of the pandemic, the ability to beat this back, was really going to be how he was ultimately judged by the American people, no matter what else happens with his agenda. And so you can imagine their frustration is just with how frustrated the American people continue to be by the state of COVID at this point. It's really been tough, and that's, I think, part of what they're using to explain the political position that they're in, that because they always wanted to say we're following the science. Well, sometimes the science is hard to follow, and they've been doing their best to keep up with the changing nature of the pandemic, the changing variations here, but it's been a tough act for them. And so as we mark the 1 year mark later this week, it's really, I think, a really flashing red light at the start of a campaign year that the public is so sour, and they really use that to say that that's really what's to explain for the broader political problems that the president's having. There's
also a key piece to this as it relates to timing, Mem, right? Not just because on Wednesday that White House website opens up where people can start signing up to get free at-home tests, but also because of what you're looking at as it relates to the Omicron surge, right? You've got some numbers out of New York and the Northeast that show that new Omicron cases seem to be peaking. Now, that doesn't mean we're out of the woods. You've got something like 800,000 cases every day. But this could be a pretty significant, 2, 3, 4 weeks for the White House here on that front.
Yeah, they're looking closely, as we often are, across the pond, as they say, seeing what's happening in Europe, where the sort of lifespan of the Omicron variant was sort of tighter than what we saw with Delta. But the problem is, and this is what our scientists are often pointing out, is that the U.S. is a very different animal than some of these European countries that we often look to, because we have such greater geographic diversity and diversity within our politics. And that's, I think, the real concern that the White House is also looking ahead to. It's a good thing that some of the very populated areas of the Northeast, where this hit hardest first, is now beginning to recede. But look at some of the redder states as we moved west from the I-95 corridor. And Chuck Todd did a great job of laying this out yesterday on Meet the Press, where you have fewer vaccinated individuals. When the Omicron numbers really catch up with the rest of the country as they hit hardest first with the Northeast, you're going to see even more strain on rural hospitals. And that's going to be a real challenge for the White House moving forward, working with local officials who aren't necessarily always cooperative.
Mike Memoli never misses an episode of Meet the Press. Mem, thank you so much. Appreciate you being on with us on this holiday Monday. Thanks. So the International Olympic Committee today confirmed Beijing is not going to sell tickets to the public for the 22 Winter Games, set to happen really just a couple weeks away. We're 18 days out from opening ceremonies. Organizers say they're only going to sell tickets to selected spectators instead. China's gone to some really extreme lengths to try to prevent the spread of Omicron. They've locked down 20 million people in 3 different cities in a matter of weeks. But guess what? Guess what just happened? Beijing just got its first confirmed Omicron case this past weekend. I want to bring in now Matt Bradley. And Matt, that seems to have been, if not the catalyst, at least one of the catalysts, right, that has triggered this new move from China ahead of the Olympics.
Well, it's hard to live in denial, isn't it, when you see something like that happening, which is kind of what the China's zero COVID policy has been doing. I mean, when you see what's happening with Omicron, it almost seems quaint, doesn't it? Like a country that acts like someone that, I'm sure you know somebody like this, I know somebody like this, I know many people like this, who took every precaution, who were terrified of the disease, never cheated, did everything that they were asked to do, and did more than that, restricted themselves, and still ended up getting the variant, getting Omicron, or getting COVID. And that just goes to show that this zero COVID policy by China is colliding with the realities of the Omicron variant and with the Olympics and with the Chinese New Year that's going to be starting right around the same time. So this zero COVID policy that we're talking about, it seems like it's going to be really tough to sustain throughout all of these events that are coming up, if it was even sustainable before.
Right. So talk to me. Listen, we know then that some people, you know, a lot of people aren't going to be let in, right? Just a limited group of spectators. What about the people who are in the Olympic bubble, let's say? We saw a lot of really strict measures in Tokyo not too long ago for the Summer Olympics. What's it going to be like now for the Winter Olympics if you are going to watch the games, if you are an athlete, or, Matt, like some of our colleagues who are going for NBC?
Yeah. Hard to know, Hallie. I mean, you know, Tokyo had some very restrictive restrictions, but they ended up with 400 cases, even within their COVID bubble. 400 cases. That's something that China would not tolerate. So, I mean, it's really hard to know. We don't know what the policies are going to be. They haven't made them explicitly clear. And as I said to you earlier on MSNBC during your day job on MS, you know, we were talking about that.
You're not supposed to talk about that,
It doesn't seem like... it doesn't seem like something that they can plan for. And so they're leaving it probably, and this is not something I have because of privileged information, but it seems like they're probably leaving it deliberately vague so that they don't have to make regulations and then change them. So they've announced that these very tight restrictions are going to be happening, but who knows? I mean, one of the tight restrictions they had before was that those who are allowed at the Olympics can clap, but they're not allowed to cheer because that would spread disease from cheering. So, I mean, we can expect those sorts of restrictions coming up, or maybe they'll realize that Omicron is a force that maybe can't be stopped, and that they need to do what the rest of the West and other countries have done, which is this policy of living with the virus, which is what you and I and the rest of us are really starting to get used to.
Matt Bradley, live for us there overseas. Our second conversation today, but an even better and more different one than we had before. Matt Bradley, thank you so much, friend. Appreciate it. So coming up here on the show, the Australian Open is finally happening without Novak Djokovic. The tennis star was deported from Australia over the weekend. And guess what? This might not be the only big tournament he's banned from this year. You've got an all-star with us coming up after the break. We'll be right back. The Australia Open started today without the world's #1 tennis player. That's because Novak Djokovic is back home in Serbia after he was deported Sunday because of his vaccination status. Short version, he's not vaxxed. And Djokovic, when he got home, was greeted kind of like a hero. He had fans taking selfies with him as he got off the flight. Hundreds of other people stood outside the airport to welcome him home. But here's the thing. This isn't over for Djokovic. There's a lot still ahead. You've got Spain and France making it clear he's got to follow their COVID rules in order to be able to play in those tournaments. And players still in the Australian Open found themselves having to answer questions about Djokovic, not even their own gameplay, yet again today.
Honestly, I wish him all the best. I think the situation has been a mess. He's not the only one that did probably the things.
To be completely honest, it didn't really affect me.
Mary Carrillo is joining me now. Mary, I'm so glad to have you on. Thank you for coming on because, boy, listen, us in the news business, we don't talk about tennis all that often, right? We don't talk about Djokovic all that often, but we've been talking about him so much because he has really become the public face of, like, vaccine mandates versus kind of personal freedoms. And now the French are saying, unless you're vaxxed, you don't get to come in. This could have a real impact on his career.
No, absolutely, Hallie. By the way, Naomi Osaka said something very funny after she won her first round match. She was asked about the Djokovic thing. Where do you stand on that? And she said, she's smart. She said, is my opinion going to change anything?
That is smart. Well, right.
It's so smart. Djokovic had been critical of Osaka when she decided on social media right before the French Open she wasn't going to give press conferences. And there was a big backlash, and a lot of people came down on her. I happen to agree with what Novak Djokovic said. We get so little access as journalists to these players. He said it's part of the gig. I agreed with him on that. Anyway, yeah, of course it's going to affect Novak. It could affect his place in history. It could affect his #1 ranking, Hallie. Yeah, if you follow such things, the Australian Open is worth 2,000 ATP points. There's a tournament coming up in the States, in Indian Wells and one in Miami. They're worth 1,000 points each. He could lose his #1 ranking. He could lose his grasp of what I consider to be the greatest tennis player of all time. He's got the dude, my main man, Dr. Fauci, he's got to get vaxxed. My other main man, even the Pope, I mean, he's got his own personal opinions about a lot of stuff.
Excuse me, Mary Carrillo, showing off your bobbleheads. I love it.
I got my action figures.
But wait.
Look, he's got to do it. If he doesn't do it, he becomes a hero in Serbia, and to his Serbian fans, maybe a martyr, a victim, whatever it is. But we need the guy to be playing tennis. To my mind, if he doesn't get vaccinated, here's my problem. You've tried to explain this to me. I don't understand intelligent people, and Novak is very intelligent. I don't understand people who are at once wary of the vaccine but not wary of COVID. Nobody will ever be able to explain that math to me.
You know, is it because he's already had it? And because he's still standing from it? Like, you know, I mean, I assume, is that not part of this? Because I think what you point out, and I think it's so important, Mary, the entire incentive structure for him, his career, his place in history, the money that he makes, right, whether he needs more bazillions of dollars or not, is determined, like, just getting the shot could take care of all that stuff, right? But then there's this other tension, too, on, like, as you're talking about, is he now going to become a martyr for the anti-vax movement?
That's not what he was trying to do. I mean, he really was going to Australia thinking they were going to let him in, thinking he was going to be able to have a shot at winning the Australian Open for the 10th time. He's won 20 majors. 9 of them have come in Melbourne. So I don't think that's what he's trying to do, but I just don't see any way out for him now. I just think that there's going to be fewer and fewer vaccine exemptions going forward. This thing isn't going away. We saw what happened in China. The optics are so important to Beijing and the Olympics, and you want fans in the stands. Every fan that's walking through the gates at the Australian Open these next couple of weeks, they all have to be vaccinated. So I mean, and again, I think he lost the locker room because there are plenty of people in those locker rooms that were reluctant to get vaccinated, but they did it. They did it because that's how you get to enter other countries and play tennis. So. But in Serbia, you know what? Like about 30% of that country is vaccinated. So clearly there's a cultural difference and a different mindset to some of these people.
You know, we talked about Naomi Osaka just a second ago, and there has been this interesting point that's been raised about maybe a double standard here. You had this Scottish filmmaker, I'm sure you've seen, spark this whole discussion by tweeting this. He said, quote, if Naomi Osaka or Serena Williams acted in the way Novak Djokovic has acted in the past couple weeks, the Tennis Association would be sharpening their knives. I wonder, Mary, do you feel like that's a fair critique?
Naomi Osaka, she got it handed to her at the French Open. It's because I think the associations were afraid that all the other players were going to bail on press conferences too. You know, this is a complicated thing, but there are 7 different governing bodies in tennis, the 7 silos of tennis. At any moment, I'm aggravated with at least 3 of them. So there's the Women's Tennis Association, and they tried to support Naomi as much as they could. The Men's Tennis Association, the ATP. You know, you got the ITF, the International Federation, the 4 majors. Obviously, Tennis Australia does not want to talk about this because they are complicit in this steaming mess. The ATPs, they said, we continue to strongly recommend vaccination to all players. Mandate it. Make it a rule, guys. Come on. Step it up.
Mary Carrillo. So good to talk to you. So good to have you on. Listen, we're going to see what happens with the Australian Open in the next couple weeks. And, by the way, with the French Open and Djokovic's status after that. Thank you so much.
I'll be around, Hallie.
Don't you say that unless you expect me to take you up on that offer. So thank you. We love having you. Mary, thank you. Really appreciate it. Coming up here on the show, some train tracks in L.A. Have you seen this? Covered with empty boxes, a whole bunch of trash this weekend. Officials say that's because thieves have been targeting trains. They're on the rise now. So did all that cardboard cause a derailment? This is a bizarre one. We're talking about it after the break. Coming up, the new so-called white gold rush in California, with some people hoping it could power our future. That's in tonight's original. But first, let's get you over to the 5 things our team thinks you should know about tonight. Number 1, Japanese and South Korean officials say North Korea conducted yet another missile test today, the 4th one this month. Experts think there's more activity because of the Biden administration's new sanctions on Pyongyang. Number 2, any kind of communications with Tonga is still cut off 2 days after an underwater volcano erupted, covering the island with ash. Australia and New Zealand have sent in surveillance flights. They say initial reports seem to suggest that maybe it was not a mass casualty event. That would be a good thing, but there is some major damage. Any help sent to Tonga has to be quarantined because of COVID. That's complicating things, too. Number 3, Oxfam says the world's 10 richest men doubled their collective wealth in the pandemic. It's about $15,000 per second more. Wrap your brain around that. The charity also says 160 million more people were pushed into poverty in the last 2 years. Number 4, scientists are starting to figure out why COVID affects only some people's sense of smell. There's this new study in the journal Nature Genetics and says there's a genetic risk factor associated with losing your sense of smell after getting infected. They're still not totally sure why that happens. Number 5, we are remembering, as I'm sure you are too, the late Betty White on what would have been her 100th birthday today. She died on New Year's Eve at age 99 after a stroke. Fans have gone online to social media. They're celebrating her life, her legacy. In many instances, they're donating to animal shelters in honor of renowned animal lover Betty White. So if you recently ordered a package and it never arrived, it is entirely possible it might have been stolen from a cargo train. Does train theft sound like something out of like the old Wild West days? Sure, but that's happening. Check this out. This is the aftermath of 17 train cars that derailed in downtown Los Angeles. The crew was not hurt. That's a good thing. But look at all that trash. Do you see all those little specks, all the whites? That's torn packages. Those are empty boxes. And even though this particular derailment is still under investigation, there's a question of whether it's connected to these thieves who are targeting cargo trains. In the past couple years, there's been a 160% increase in thefts on tracks just in LA County alone. And all of that has meant more tension between government officials, the people that run these trains, officials who are in charge of this whole thing over how to handle it, basically. I want to bring in Gotti Schwartz, here on this story. I'm tongue-tied, Gotti, because this is so bananas, right? We've talked about smash and grabs in California. This is something else entirely. These are people, like, again, train thefts. It feels like something we don't hear about anymore, but it's really significant.
That's right. And there's also this brazen component that is making so many people enraged here. A lot of it coming down to people with bolt cutters jumping onto train cars and wreaking absolute havoc in these shipping containers. And there are several stretches where those trains transporting goods from the port slow down enough to stop. And that seems to be where the choke points are for what has basically become modern day banditry.
That's
Union Pacific, the railway, says that they're seeing. Yeah, I mean, that's the only way to describe it, the wild, wild west out here. Now, the railway says that they're seeing this organized criminal element, sometimes recruiting people who live out on the streets to try to help them ransack some of those shipping containers. Once they're cracked open, and then you've seen the aftermath, that's thousands and thousands of packages chucked out onto the tracks.
Right,
most of the valuable stuff you don't see on the tracks. That's loaded onto getaway vans, while the rest of it, people are just rummaging through and they take what they want. There are packages heading to everywhere, from COVID-19 tests to gifts, clothing, designer bags, furniture. So again, like you said, if you're missing a package, you check this shipping, it says that there's an indefinite delay with no explanation. There's a chance this could be the explanation.
Wait, God, I have another question, but I have to. Are you soaking wet? Do you not have an umbrella in the rain out there? You're literally dripping.
I know. I mean, there is an umbrella inside. It's so rare that we get rain like this in L.A. that I figured, talking to Hallie out in the rain.
I really want to know about what these companies are doing to try to stop this stuff, but I feel bad asking you another question when you're swimming out there in L.A.
This sweater is just for show. It's like 67, 68 degrees out here, so I'm doing all right. This L.A. rain will take it any time.
So then talk to me about what they're doing.
The smash and grabs.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've seen those. Union Pacific, you got to remember, has its own police force, right? They've got their own special agents, but now they're asking for some help from LAPD, from the Sheriff's Department. And as overwhelmed as those agents seem, they are pointing to another issue, which is the lack of prosecution and oftentimes the immediate release of people that they actually arrest. So here's a Union Pacific representative talking about how some of the people they catch tell their agents they're going to be back when they get out of jail.
We arrest these individuals, they do not have to pay bail, and they come out probably within 24 hours. They tell our staff on the ground that they'll be back, and they do come back to steal.
In the last couple of days, The Union Pacific has sent out cleaning crews to start picking up all that debris. They're working on keeping those tracks clear. They also had to clean up that derailment that you mentioned, 17 cars. But right now, Union Pacific says they're seeing about 90 shipping containers broken into every single day.
That's so much. Gotti Schwartz, thank you. Please go inside or get Kimmy to bring you an umbrella or do something. We'll send you one. We worry about you and your health and safety. Thank you, friend. Now I want to bring you tonight's original.
I would love a Hallie Jackson umbrella.
Thank you, Gotti. Tonight's original has some in-depth reporting on a topic we've been keeping an eye on. With nearly every big car maker announcing plans to roll out some kind of electric car, there is huge demand for something that's really important to the manufacturer of those cars. White gold, they call it, a.k.a. lithium. Lithium prices have skyrocketed because it is so important for these electric car batteries. One estimate says the EV, the electric vehicle market, that's what they call it, is going to account for 90% of lithium demand by 2030. Right now, the U.S. only mines and processes about 1% of the whole global lithium supply. But one project in Southern California hopes to get that number up pretty dramatically. Check out Guad Venegas reporting.
A massive drill rig tapping into what could be the energy of the future in a billion-dollar project promising to transform this region. Southern California's Imperial County is a desert valley. Temperatures here can reach 120 degrees. Its residents live under the threat of toxic dust, the result, experts say, of decades of agricultural chemicals accumulated from runoff, now exposed in the lake bed of the Salton Sea.
A lot of people, like especially the kids and the old people, getting the asthmas, asthma, allergics, all the stuff.
Yet this California desert contains a valuable resource essential to America's future. Large amounts of highly concentrated hot salt water known as brine are located underground. It can be used to make renewable energy. Jim Turner is leading a project working to tap into the resource.
So if you can bring that brine to the surface, you have a lot of energy in the form of heat that you can use to do work.
Geothermal energy production has been around for years, but this project is looking to double dip, extracting an additional element found in the brine, lithium, currently in high demand to be used in electric car batteries.
4,000 feet underground is a massive aquifer containing superheated lithium-rich brine. Now, the plant will extract the lithium from that brine while simultaneously creating geothermal electricity.
Most of the lithium today comes from Australia and South America. It then gets shipped to Asia for refinement before it's used in batteries, most made in China. With automakers shifting to electric vehicles, lithium might be the white gold of the future, and extracting it in California could reduce or even eliminate America's dependency on Chinese production.
It will be the largest lithium production in the U.S. It may end up being the largest the single lithium production facility globally.
Turner says the project could bring thousands of jobs to the area, currently suffering from a 17% unemployment rate, the highest in the state. Yet some of the locals say they want to know more about the plans.
I don't know, not that much. They say they're going to be a big plant.
Ruben owns the BUCKSHOT diner near the extraction site, and like many, he doesn't understand the process, but he trusts it will bring prosperity to a region where 22% of people live in poverty.
Well, they need more jobs. And if the revenues come to the town, and it's going to be good for the people around here.
The footprint is very small.
Michael McKibben is a professor at UC Riverside who's an expert in the geology of the region.
I think the way to look at it is in comparison to the way we're mining lithium elsewhere in the world. So in South America, in Chile, they're bringing up groundwater out of dry lakes, really shallow groundwater, and creating these huge evaporation ponds on the surface that are, half the size of Los Angeles. In Australia and China, they're mainly mining hard rock for lithium, so they have to have open pit mines where they blast rock with dynamite and they have to crush that rock. This method of producing lithium is really amazingly clean because the brine's already being brought to the surface. It's already having the steam taken out of it to run turbines and make electricity. And then that brine and the condensed steam is re-injected back in the ground.
The local water district also collects taxes on the extraction, money that can be used to invest in local water needs for the region located in the desert. It's a promise of prosperity for the marginalized people in these communities, with 10 geothermal plants already operating and 2 additional lithium extraction projects. A race to fulfill America's needs to power our future.
Guad is joining us now from Los Angeles. We are so glad for you to bring us that reporting, Guad. It's fascinating. And you now have this money from Governor Gavin Newsom there in California, who wants to put $22 billion, right, to try to fight climate change. Talk to me about what kind of impact that might have on those Salton Sea plants you're talking about.
Right, so that investment is going to help push production and the purchase of electric cars on the road here in California, which includes rebates for some of the people buying those cars. And of course, that means a higher demand for lithium. Governor Newsom called this area on the southern tip of the Salton Sea the Saudi Arabia of lithium. And he said that the plan is to work with legislators and companies that want to invest in this lithium extraction to create policies that are going to increase investment and just make it more attractive to build more of these extraction plants. And the idea here is to build battery factories right next to the plants so that the lithium is sent directly to them, then processed, and then they can create these batteries. And of course, this will create jobs for this area in the Imperial Valley where there's a need for jobs, there's a need for prosperity. And, you know, the people really have had no hope until these projects have started coming around.
It's sort of interesting one-stop shopping, if you will, for this sort of white gold lithium battery stuff. Guad Venegas, great reporting. We're really glad to have you. Thank you. Big U.S. airline CEOs are sounding the alarm in a big way on what they say could be a catastrophic aviation crisis. Coming up, what they think could happen on Wednesday when AT&T and Verizon roll out their new 5G service. You don't want to miss this. NBC News covers hundreds of stories every day, and because you couldn't possibly read or watch or listen to them all, our bureau teams have done it for you. This is what they tell us is going down in their regions in a segment we call The Local. From our Southeast Bureau, a candle factory in Kentucky that was destroyed by a deadly tornado last month. Remember that? It's not going to be reopening. The company says it's laying off hundreds of employees. About half its workers will get moved to another nearby plant that's supposed to open soon. Our Northeast Bureau reporting the man accused of pushing an Asian woman to her death at a New York City subway station is now facing second-degree murder charges. Police say this suspect has a criminal history, including multiple arrests, and that he's had what police call emotionally disturbed encounters. They think he was homeless, experiencing homelessness at the time of the assault. And our West Coast Bureau has a story about a stunning escape from a house that was sliding off its foundation in Washington. This is the aftermath of it, but unbelievably, 2 people, look at that, 2 people and their dog got out alive, got out unhurt before the whole house collapsed this morning. We don't officially know what caused the collapse, but it may have had something to do with a big water main break nearby at the time. The airline industry's top executives just this afternoon, late this afternoon, say we're just days away from a potentially catastrophic problem at airports all across the country. Why? Has to do with 5G, you know, like on your phone. Airline CEOs say the rollout of this new cell phone tech could create huge issues for their planes, specifically in bad weather. And it is so serious, they've written a letter to the feds saying partly, quote, immediate intervention, they say, is needed to avoid significant operational disruption to air passengers, shippers, supply chain, and delivery of needed medical supplies. Let me translate that in plain English. They're basically saying if this happens, it is going to be a huge mess. Tom Costello covers all things transportation for us. Tom, this is a big deal, right? This letter is from United, Delta, Southwest, the heads of the big carriers. We know that the phone companies have already delayed this 5G rollout once. What happens on Wednesday?
Yeah, actually, they've delayed it twice, and they're not happy about that at all. They say enough already. They want to get going. They flipped the switch on Wednesday. 5G will become active. The airlines are specifically worried because the FAA is concerned about the possibility that the ground stations, the 5G ground stations, will interfere with critical technology inside aircraft cockpits, specifically the altimeters, which help a pilot land if he's coming in during bad weather and poor visibility, it gives them very accurate readings of what their altitude is. So if they have an interference problem with that altimeter and they can't rely on it, then it becomes a very dangerous approach. And so the FAA has said right now, if you are flying into 80 airports as of Wednesday, 80 airports, big airports, you cannot rely on your altimeter when 5G goes active because of the possibility of interference. These are big airports: O'Hare, JFK, Seattle, LAX, for example. And guess what? On Wednesday, we're expecting bad weather on the West Coast. So already, planners are saying, boy, we may already have thousands of flights canceled just on the West Coast on Wednesday because people can't fly in, planes can't fly in, and rely on their altimeters. So this is becoming a very big problem. The FAA and the FCC have been at each other's throats on this. Two government agencies, they are in complete disagreement. One backs the cell phone industry, one backs the airlines. They can't agree any further on this thing. That's why the pilots and the airlines are now calling essentially on the White House to intervene.
This is such a potentially big deal, right, Tom? So I have a couple questions. First of all, 5G already happens in Europe, right? And planes are flying fine over there. The airlines are operating fine over there. What's the issue here? Is there a different issue, or is it just that we haven't had this before?
Well, first of all, it is very complicated technology. So to try to boil it down for you and me, it is both of these. The bottom line is that the new 5G operates on a specific band, right? And that band, that frequency band, is the same one that is shared by the altimeters. But in Europe, they are operating at a little bit of a variation of that frequency. And the antennae, if you will, are pointed in a different direction. And the airlines are saying, wait a minute, that's apples and oranges, because of the way that their technology is implemented versus the way it is here. Here, the cell phone industry says, don't worry about it. There's enough of a buffer between the frequencies. The FAA says we haven't proved that to ourselves yet. By the way, can I just make the point?
Please.
80 airports as of Wednesday, the FAA is saying pilots cannot rely on their altimeters. They are allowing planes that have been certified to fly in. But right now, only 45% of the aircraft fleet by the FAA has been certified to fly in. So the vast majority of planes out there are not certified to come in to these airports.
Super quick, Tom, because I'm out of time, but I have to ask, at what point is it like Wednesday at midnight, or Tuesday at midnight? Is it Wednesday 8 a.m.? At what point could the phone companies push this delay if there is, in fact, this airline domino issue that's going to happen? Like, how much longer do we have? Is it really just, 48, 72 hours?
Well, 36, right? I would not anticipate that the cell phone companies are going to delay this any further. So I think if the White House doesn't intervene, come Wednesday morning, we may start to see cancellations.
Tom Costello, I know this is a story we'll be talking about with you more, and you'll be talking about it on NBC Nightly News. Thank you so much for making time for us. I know you're crashing on that. Appreciate it. Coming up, the University of Michigan fired its president. You hear this? For allegedly breaking a rule that he set last summer. More on the investigation into an inappropriate relationship he had with an employee when we come back. The University of Michigan today is now looking for a new president after Mark Schlissel was fired. An investigation revealed he had an affair, apparently, with a university employee. You saw students protesting pretty quickly. 100 of them or so gathered outside his house after the decision. The university also released nearly 120 pages of emails between Schlissel and this employee who's not being identified, including one exchange from July. The woman wrote, "Her heart hurts." Schlissel responded, "I know, mine too." That exchange happened on the very same month that Schlissel himself announced the university's zero-tolerance policy for somebody in leadership having a romantic relationship with someone they have authority over because of the unfair power dynamic. Shaq Brewster is on the story for us. And Shaq, let me start with that university policy, right? The school says they're going to change the way they handle these misconduct cases, allegations of misconduct. Now the news comes out that it's now former president had been involved, apparently, in this years-long affair. Talk about the timeline on this and what we're hearing from Michigan.
Yeah, let's start with that timeline, because it was on Saturday when the board announced that they were firing Schlichtel for this misconduct, releasing a letter that was dated on Saturday. They said in that they released a tip, or received a tip back in December, talking about this 2-year-long sexual misconduct or relationship between the president and one of his subordinates. But the thing that's getting so much attention, and you mentioned it there, is that it was just in July when you had this former president come out and unveil a package of reforms and how the school was going to be handling misconduct, and setting forth a rule saying that teachers and students weren't allowed to engage in any relationship, and extended that to supervisors and their subordinates. When he released that, he said this was going to be a zero-tolerance policy. And one quote that I saw from one of an interview that he did with a local affiliate, he said it's exceptionally important because of the power dynamic between those two parties. So that's what the Board of Regents was saying, was that he knew the importance of this rule. He knew that this rule existed, and now they're saying he violated that rule, Hallie.
Have we heard anything from him, Shaq, since this all happened? And then also, you know, there are like tons of emails that the school has released between him and between this employee, which, you know, you don't always see in investigations like this.
Right, that is somewhat unusual. We have not heard much from him, but let's go to those emails that were released, because, yes, it was about 118 pages that were just put out online so anyone can see. It was redacted, so the accuser here was, or the subordinate was not identified there, but it includes emails and some text messages. I should also mention, you know, one thing when you look at these emails is there's no big bombshell. It's not like there's this image that is in these emails, but what the emails do make clear is that there was clearly an inappropriate relationship between the school president and a subordinate. You hear suggestive and flirtatious language coming from him. He shares articles about sexual fantasies at one point. They're planning travel together and extending that travel so they can do other activities like sightseeing, some of them involving international travel. So I think part of the reason why you're hearing the school being praised for releasing the full documents in those 118 pages of emails is that it makes clear exactly what went wrong. It shows it, and it shows exactly how the board is saying he violated the policies, again, policies that he announced just back in July.
Shaq Brewster live for us on that story. Shaq, thank you very much for bringing us that reporting. I appreciate it. And thanks to all of you for watching us this hour. As you know, we're going to have more for you tomorrow, same time, same place. We're so glad you're joining us here on NBC News Now. Coverage picks up right now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.